This will sound very strange, but the death of Iranian General Soleimani on January 3rd, 2020, from the rocket that was delivered by the drone sent by President Trump, is a prophetic sign and prophecy that is pointing to Daniel chapter 10 in the Bible, and Archangel Michael fighting the Prince of Persia. And God has used these together in a prophecy that are pointing to the date that Israel will destroy, probably with nuclear bombs, Iran's nuclear energy and weapons facilities. Israel will drop a nuclear bomb on Iran on June 27, 2022. It will be the first nuclear bomb used in an act of war since World War II. The post date for this video, the date that this video is posted, proves that this prediction was made ahead of time, and videos can't be edited once they are posted. As well, this timestamped email and this forensic notes PDF prove that this prediction was made ahead of time. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. The reason God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that everything that I am saying in this video is true. Proving all of the main conclusions in this video is the purpose for God giving this prediction in this video. In other words, this is a serious warning for those that disagree with the things being stated in this video. It is predicted that Israel will bomb, probably with nuclear bombs, Iran's nuclear energy and weapons facilities on June 27, 2022. After this short introduction, the rest of this video will be an explanation for how God's signs, patterns, and connections pointed to the date April 26th, in relation to the day that Israel will bomb, probably with nuclear bombs, Iran's nuclear energy and weapons facilities. It was known since 2021 that God was pointing to April 26th, and prior to April 26th, it was believed that this would be the date that Israel would bomb Iran. Instead, however, on this day, a big news story regarded the White House's statement that Iran's breakout time has been reduced from a year to weeks. The White House stated that it was very concerned about this. The breakout time refers to the amount of time it would take Iran to enrich enough uranium for a nuclear bomb. This was a new development regarding Iran's nuclear program, and it coincidentally occurred on April 26th, the date that was known ahead of time since 2021. This statement from the White House came after Secretary of State Anthony Blinken's testimony in a U.S. Senate hearing earlier in this day. He told Senate Foreign Relations Chairman Senator Bob Menendez that Iran's breakout time had been reduced from a year to weeks. This emphasis on weeks was a sign that God gave us that indicated that the day that Israel will nuke Iran is weeks away. But just how many weeks is the question. It is explained in the Chariots of Fire prophecy video how the prophetic signs on April 26th revealed adding 3 weeks to April 26th. This gave us May 17th. Sure enough, on May 17th, we received stunning prophetic signs related to Israel bombing Iran, and these signs were expected in advance prior to May 17th. On May 17th, it was first reported that for the first time ever, Israel would be conducting a simulation of a wide-scale attack on Iran and its nuclear facilities. This simulation drill over the Mediterranean Sea was part of the largest in decades large-scale military drill war exercise that the Israeli Defense Forces named Chariots of Fire. This month-long Chariots of Fire drill began weeks before the composer of Chariots of Fire died, and the drill was named Chariots of Fire a long time before it began. On this same May 17th day, recording artist Vangelis died. Vangelis won an Oscar Academy Award for composing the song Chariots of Fire. There are so many amazing things regarding these signs that occurred on May 17th. The prophetic Chariots of Fire signs revealed adding exactly 6 weeks to May 17th to give us June 27th as the day that Israel will bomb Iran. It is highly recommended that you pause this video here and first watch the Chariots of Fire prophecy video, and then come back and watch this video. Make sure you come back and watch this video though, as this video is also very important. The rest of this video was recorded before April 26th. I'm not going to edit the rest of this video. Instead, this video will provide the explanation for how God was pointing to April 26th, and what I have just said in this explanation in the introduction of this video explains how April 26th was for the purpose of pointing to May 17th and June 27th. In other words, on April 26th, God was not finished with this particular trail of signs in his big picture of signs, and this story that he is telling. April 26th was a very important step and important piece of the puzzle, and to understand this story, it is essential for us to learn how God was pointing to April 26th. This will be the subject of the rest of this video. All right, so let's begin here with October 27th, 2018. The signs that occurred in the state have been described or explained a number of times in a couple of other videos, so I'm just going to go through it quickly. Again, this was a date expected ahead of time. It was predicted ahead of time. There were videos made ahead of time that were predicting a sign involving the number 4 on this day, because for one thing, it was Game 4 of the extremely prophetic 2018 World Series. On this day, the big news story in this game was how Dodgers pitcher, player number 44, ended up being prematurely removed from the game too early and thus blowing the 4-0 lead that the Dodgers had. President Trump, God's trumpet, the name Trump in archaic English is the word for trumpet or the sounding of a trumpet, which is why President Trump's vice president was Pence. Trump Pence hints at trumpets. President Trump, God's trumpet that he uses to trumpet and highlight his prophetic signs, on this day trumpet his disapproval of the manager's decision to pull the pitcher too early from the game. He mentioned the pitcher and the 4-0 blown lead. This 4-0 blown lead hinted at the number 40, and number 40 weeks is a number of weeks God uses in his big picture of signs because it symbolizes a birth. According to the medical profession, 40 weeks is the average human gestation period, and this Game 4 with the 4-0 blown lead was exactly 40 weeks after the Humanity Star was launched. The Humanity Star had a philosophy of humanism, and it was Antichrist symbolism, and this is why it was the symbolism for the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem. It was supposed to be in orbit for 9 months, which also symbolizes a birth before it would deorbit and crash back to Earth. And so the Star of Bethlehem signified the birth of the first coming of Lord Jesus Christ. And that's why this was the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem, 40 weeks, birth pains symbolism to this 4-0 blown lead. Another reason why I knew this day ahead of time is because it was exactly 444 days after the Revelation 12 rapture sign in the night sky in 2017, which depicted a birth. And it was symbolizing also the birth of the church into heaven. Okay, also on this day was the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh in Rich Squirrel Hill. The media stories all mentioned how it was the wealthy neighborhood of Pittsburgh, Rich Squirrel Hill, and the pitcher, player number 44, his name was Rich Hill. In this shooting, 4 police officers were wounded, And there were 11 deaths, which hinted at 4 times 11 equals 44. All of this is hinting at the Antichrist, the 44th president. And that's why 40 weeks after the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem was this sign involving player number 44 in Game 4 on the day that 4 police officers were wounded. The philosophy behind it was secular humanism, etc. Again, we have the 4 police officers wounded in the Jewish synagogue, and this was the day of Game 4 of the World Series, in which the story was about player number 44 and how the 4-0 lead was blown, which hinted at 40, and it was 40 weeks after the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem, the humanity star, and 40 weeks is the average human gestation period. And this Game 4 and player number 44 and the 4 police officers wounded was 444 days after the Revelation 12 sign was fulfilled in the night sky, which depicted a birth. And all of this, player number 44 and the 4 police officers wounded on the day of Game 4, is exactly 44 months before June 27th, 2022. The date is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran. And this event, Israel bombing Iran, will ultimately lead to the rise of the Antichrist, the 44th president. All right, the most central prophecy in the Bible is the 70 weeks prophecy in Daniel chapter 9, which regards the end times period and the rule of the Antichrist in the 70th week. But this prophecy is broken into 62 weeks and also 69 weeks, which is why it is amazing that we have this exact 62 weeks and exact 69 weeks connection from this extremely prophetic Game 4 sign. Exactly 62 weeks later was the day that the Iranian general Soleimani was shot down with a rocket missile from the drone that was initiated by President Trump. And so that's amazing. This date also was the date January 3rd, which is 1-3, which hints at the number 13, which from the Bible symbolizes the Antichrist. Nimrod, a type for the Antichrist, was the 13th generation from Ham. Haman, another type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews in Persia on the 2 13th days of the months. And that's why it's amazing that this Persian general, Iran is, of course, modern-day Persia, and that's why this general was shot down, this biggest news story involving Iran, on this date, which hints at the number 13, which symbolizes the Antichrist, and Haman in the book of Esther, which is a story regarding the Jews' experience in ancient Persia, persecuted the Jews on the 2 13th days of the month. And also the 2 antichrists are described in the book of Revelation in chapter 13. And this death of this general Soleimani, I don't know how you pronounce it because I don't get my news from television, so I only read my news. The Iranian general Soleimani, his death was due to an explosion. And of course, we are talking about in this video the upcoming explosion that's predicted in Iran, ancient Persia. Exactly 69 weeks after this was April 30th, 2021, another day I knew ahead of time and predicted ahead of time, with documented the prediction. And at the time, I thought that this would be the day that Israel would bomb Iran, given the information that was had at that time. But as we can see in this diagram, it was another step along the way to the day that Israel will nuke Iran's nuclear weapons facility program on April 26th, 2022. On this April 30th, 2021, was the biggest civil disaster in Israel's modern history when 44 people died in the stampede It was updated the following day to 45, which is also relevant because the 45th president will skip the 45th presidency before he becomes president again and Antichrist. And the Antichrist will be involved in Israel, in Jerusalem, along with the United Nations or a new incarnation of it, in its making of Jerusalem an international city. The biggest thing that God has prohibited and warned against in Bible prophecy. Anyway, that symbolizes the world's rebellion against God. Well, this diagram continues up here. This is the same date. Okay, this April 30th, 2021. And by the way, I didn't mention in other videos, on this day was the day that Roberto Alomar was cancel cultured. Hall of Famer player, baseball player for the Toronto Blue Jays was cancel cultured on this day. And that was Antichrist symbolism, because the truth about cancel culture is it is a dress rehearsal for mass murder and genocide. The canceling of people is murderous. And so there's a murderousness to cancel culture. Anyway, this day was exactly 7 years after Roberto Alomar was the final strikeout in Nolan Ryan's 7th no-hitter. Nolan Ryan was the strikeout king, which was Antichrist symbolism. The day that he pitched this game, he was 44 years old. And pitchers on the pitching mound, God uses as symbolism for the Antichrist on the Temple Mount in the end times, which will be the 44th president. And so that is just briefly the significance of that. 7 years also is symbolic of the end times period in Bible prophecy. So it was 7 years from the 7th strikeout. And Nolan Ryan also held the record for his high school for most strikeouts in a game at, I believe it was 21 strikeouts in a 7-inning game pitched, because they were only pitching 7 innings. And that strikeout was held for, coincidentally, 44 years, until it was broken twice in the same week by 2 different players at his high school in 2009, the year that the 44th president became president. All right, so 44 days after the 44 deaths in the stampede in Israel was this date 44 in the Hebrew calendar. It was June 13th, 2021. This was also another day that I predicted there would be a significant prophetic sign involving Israel, and this ended up being the day that Netanyahu was removed from office. And the reason why I knew that, of course, is because of the date being 44 days after the 44 deaths. And, of course, the Antichrist is the 44th president. Now, this day in turn was 144 days, which is a prominent and prophetic number in the book of Revelation, and is used in context with Israel. And so that's why it's 144 days after this to this sign involving Israel, which was the day that Israel, for the first time in 3.5 years, passed its first budget. And that was why it was a news story, is because of the 3.5 years. Now, 7 times in Bible prophecy, 3.5 years symbolizes the end times period. And it is only symbolic. Some people think that the times and a half time in Bible prophecy is a riddle or a clue to come to the realization or to reach the conclusion of 3.5 years, but it is the other way around. The 3.5 years is symbolism for the times and a half time, which is symbolism for tribulation. Even an individual in one's tribulation will go through a period of tribulation followed by an increase or doubling of that tribulation, followed by an easing of that tribulation, the times and a half time, which was symbolized by the experience of Shackleton and their journey to Antarctica, and the ship Endurance, which was just discovered in March 2022. And when they disembarked the ship, they had their tribulation on the ice floe, and they set up Camp Patience. The patient endurance of the saints, as it is said in Bible prophecy in the book of Revelation. And that period would symbolize the time. That was followed by 2 sea journeys. The first one being from the ice floe to Elephant Island across the very dangerous southern Atlantic Antarctica Ocean. And half of the crew were left behind on Elephant Island before the remaining half, the remaining 6, continued on into an even more arduous and journey of perseverance. And by the way, this whole experience was the most epic story of survival in arguably history. And that journey was a second leg across the sea to South Georgia Island. And then half of the crew were left behind on that shore, and the other half, the 3, traversed the uncharted South Georgia Island to the other side of the island to the whaling station. And that journey took 3.5 days. And that was also a very dangerous and arduous journey of perseverance. But I just went through that, of course, very briefly. But that symbolized the half time. So the time times and a half time, the ice floe, the 2 sea journeys, and then the journey across the island. What is also amazing about this Shackleton's voyage prophetic sign is that Shackleton returned to Antarctica. He returned to South Georgia Island, actually, and he died of a heart attack while he was there, years later. It just so happened that while he was on another voyage to Antarctica, and on the way to Antarctica, he was in South Georgia, and he died on the trip to South Georgia, and he is buried on South Georgia Island. But he died of a heart attack. And that is symbolizing, because this Shackleton's voyage is this Endurance, the ship named Endurance. It's symbolizing, again, this 3.5 days. In fact, again, South Georgia Island was where Shackleton made a journey across that island in 3.5 days. And so again, all of this is symbolizing the time times and a half time of end times tribulation. And that tribulation will largely be regarding, for God's faithful, overcoming the Antichrist and the mark of the Antichrist, the VACCINE, which causes heart attacks. And that's why Shackleton died of a heart attack on the island that he walked across in 3.5 days. But also in the book of Revelation in Daniel chapter 12, we are given a period of 1,260 days, also a period of 1,290 days, and also a period of 1,335 days. Well, 1,290 days is 30 days more than the 1,260 days, and the 1,335 days is 45 days more than the 1,290 days. So 30 days and 45 days is 3.5 months, which is more confirmation that 3.5 or 3.5 months or 3.5 years is symbolism for time times and a half time, not the other way around. The point being is that this mistaken, it is mistaken among people that follow prophecy, and for reasonable reason. I mean, but it's a mistake. And the second coming is in 2024. And the reason for God giving me a voice through this prediction is to prove this. The second coming is on the Day of Atonement in 2024, and there is a mountain as high as there is a mountain of evidence as high as Mount Everest that confirms this, including, for example, the 1,260 days back from the Day of Atonement in 2024, which was May 2nd, 2021, and that was the day that SpaceX's Dragon crew and the Dragon capsule splashed down on Earth, which was Revelation chapter 12 symbolism when the dragon is thrown down from heaven to earth, beginning the 1,260 days. But that's just scratching the surface, okay? So that's the reason why I went into that, is to let everyone know that we are now entering the final coast. This September will be, or this fall will be the beginning of the final 2 years of the tribulation period, the Great Tribulation. So anyway, that's also this 3.5 years, first budget in 3.5 years was also the same day that NASA, or rather the court judge, dismissed the lawsuit brought by Blue Origin against NASA and SpaceX for the contract that NASA awarded SpaceX for the lunar landing module. And this is all part of the attempt of NASA to return to the moon in 2024, which is a massive sign that is confirming that the return of Lord Jesus Christ is in 2024, because the moon symbolizes Christ. The sun symbolizes God the Father, and the sun's light is too bright for us to gaze at, but we can gaze at the sun's light reflected off of the moon. Also, the Bereshit moonlander, the Israeli moonlander crash into the moon in 2019 was a major prophetic sign that confirmed that the second coming is in 2024, and that is explained in the Bereshit moonlander video on this channel. The day the Bereshit, the Israeli moonlander, crashed into the moon was April 11th, 4/11, which was the date that Lord Jesus Christ was crucified. And this is one confirmation of it. There are others, but I won't get into that in this video. But what's interesting here is that this is the inverse of it. This is the date 11/4, which is Antichrist symbolism here, which is pointing again to the 44th president, as is being explained. But the contract was for $2.9 billion, which hints at the number 29, which is a number God uses to symbolize the moon, as the lunar cycle is 29.5 days. This story involving the $2.9 billion contract occurred exactly 29 weeks after NASA awarded to SpaceX the $2.9 billion contract. And so that was a second witness to this sign. And that's how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming matters, which is, as it says in the Bible, is required. And this is what makes it true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique from everything else on the internet. And speaking of this 29 weeks exact connection back from the day that the lawsuit was settled between Blue Origin and NASA to the day that SpaceX was awarded the contract of $2.9 billion from NASA, the day that SpaceX was awarded this contract was April 16th, 2021. And this was also the day of the first flag raising at the new World War I National Monument in Washington, D.C. This is highly symbolic because of the other signs that God has used involving World War I. But in a nutshell, if it's possible, I don't think so, but in a nutshell, World War I is the rumors of wars that Jesus was speaking about in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, when nation will rise up against nation and kingdom against kingdom, as he said, the beginning of the birth pains, the beginning of the end times period. A symbolic one, because World War I led to the British beating the Ottoman Turk Empire and then ruling the Palestine territory in their Palestine mandate given to them by the League of Nations, which led the way to, for example, the Balfour Declaration, which allowed Jews to immigrate back to Israel, and on in terms of the signs. So I won't get into that. But also World War I is symbolizing the world and judgment on the world, and Lord Jesus Christ coming back at the end of judgment on the world to defeat the Antichrist, for example, in Jerusalem. And so that's why in World War I, it was 4.7 million Americans that were in uniform and 117,000 deaths, which is astounding because the 47th president and Antichrist will come to power during the 117th Congress. And that's also why God is pointing back to this World War I monument, which is a monument to those that died and fought in World War I. 4.7 million in uniform, which hints at 47 and 117,000 deaths, which reveals the identity of the Antichrist that will briefly rule the world. Okay, And so on this same day, 11/4, which hinted at 11 times 4 equals 44, was exactly the 99th anniversary of the discovery of King Tut's tomb in the Valley of Kings in Egypt. Pharaoh, the king of Egypt in the Bible, is symbolism for the Antichrist. And the number 9 is the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. And that's why this date was known ahead of time. One of the reasons why I knew to expect major signs on this date was because of this. It was also the 13th anniversary of the election of the 44th president on the date 11/4 in 2008. And I have already explained how the number 13 symbolizes the Antichrist. Well, this date here was 9 months and 13 days after the death of player number 44, Hank Aaron, the home run king, which is Antichrist king symbolism. He died 6 plus 6 plus 6 days, which is Antichrist symbolism, after he took the VACCINE, which is confirmation that the VACCINE is the mark of the Antichrist and is not a supposed precursor to the mark of the Antichrist. And this is another reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction. It is the purpose of this prediction, and not appreciating this is to have missed the whole point of this video and the point of this channel. And this is because the main conclusions that are derived from God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections are inextricably tied to each other. It is an interconnected web, and in fact, the conclusions are all one and the same conclusion. Now, this day that Hank Aaron took the VACCINE was the first day of the 117th Congress, which began with a ceremonial prayer for the first time in history to pagan gods and not the God of the Bible. 117 is 9 times 13. And that's why 6 plus 6 plus 6 days after this was the death of Hank Aaron, and then 9 months and 13 days after that was the 99th anniversary of the discovery of King Tut's tomb and the 13th anniversary of the election of the 44th president. 9 symbolizes judgment, 13 symbolizes the Antichrist, and so 9 times 13 symbolizes judgment of the Antichrist on the nation in the 117th Congress, which is how we can know that the Antichrist will rise to power again during the 117th Congress. And so also Hank Aaron, player number 44, in 4 years of his career, hit a total of 44 home runs, and he tied Babe Ruth's home run record, the home run king, on the date 4/4 in 1974, exactly 44 years before the date 4/4 in 2018, when Thunderbird's ceremonial jet number 4 in its squad crashed and the pilot died, which symbolized Kamala Harris's death in a plane crash, which symbolizes when Jesus said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven, hence the Thunderbird's jet. And Barack Obama's name in Hebrew means lightning from heaven, which is explained in other videos. And anyway, Hank Aaron, player number 44, which is why Hank Aaron's death is one of the biggest signs, or the biggest sign arguably, that confirms that the VACCINE is the mark of the Antichrist. Of course, this is just scratching the surface. When this prediction comes to pass, you should know that you should watch every single minute of every video on this channel. All right, now on this day, which again was 9 months and 13 days after the death of Hank Aaron, which symbolizes the VACCINE mark of the Antichrist, was the day that Joe Biden announced his details for the VACCINE mandate, which was applicable to 84 million workers. The headlines of the news stories all mentioned 84 million workers. The reason for this is because 84 is another number God uses to reveal the identity of the Antichrist, who was born on the date 8/4, August 4th, which is the 216th day in the calendar year. And also, in Bible prophecy, the Antichrist is ruling in the 7 years, which symbolizes the end times period of the Antichrist's rule, and 7 years is 84 months. All right, now this video is about Iran. And the signs that I have just explained that occurred on November 4th 2021 is part of the trail of signs that is leading to the day that Israel will bomb, probably with nuclear bombs, Iran's nuclear facilities. So we are talking about Iran. And that is why it is absolutely astounding that on this prophetic date here, with these signs that, for example, also include very prophetic signs involving Israel. It was the 3.5 years, for example, first budget, which tied into these other Israel signs, as I just explained, which was the 44 deaths in the Israeli crush, and also Netanyahu, for example, leaving office on this date 4/4, and again, the 188 days connection. Well, this is amazing because this date here, 11/4/2021, wasn't only the 99th anniversary of King Tut's tomb being discovered in the Valley of Kings, and also the 13th anniversary of the election of the Antichrist king in 2008. But it was also the 42nd anniversary of the hostage taking at the U.S. Embassy in Iran. Now, first of all, the number 42 is Antichrist symbolism from the Bible. 7 times in Bible prophecy, it is said that the Antichrist will rule for a symbolic 42 months. For example, God uses the number 42 in his signs as Antichrist symbolism. And as has been explained here, we have a ton of Antichrist symbolism that is occurring in the signs on 11/4/2021. Not to mention the mark of the Antichrist, for example, with the 84 million workers that would be affected by the mandate, and again, the 13th anniversary and the 99th anniversary, right? All right, now 42 months is 3.5 years. And that's why it's also astounding and amazing confirmation for the relevance of this 42nd anniversary. Because on this 11/4 date, we have Israel and this first budget that was passed in, the first one passed in 3.5 years, 3.5 years. And 3.5 years, biblical years, is 42 months. A biblical year is a 30-day month. And this is astounding. Well, either way, 3.5 years is 42 months. And so we are talking about the Antichrist as well and his rule for 42 months. But in this video specifically, we are talking about Israel and Iran. And so, in other words, 42 years back from the first Israeli budget in 3.5 years is the Iranian hostage taking at the U.S. Embassy. Now, I'm definitely not old enough to remember this. This happened in 1979. I was an infant, a kid. But reading up about it and learning about it, it's very, very important in history, especially Iranian history. This was a pivotal moment in Iranian history. And there wouldn't be, for example, this need to bomb Iran's nuclear facilities had it not been for this date, 11/4 in 1979. Okay, so just briefly, the students organized a protest at the U.S. Embassy. They had planned to storm the embassy just for a few hours. This was the original plan, to get attention. The goal, they were supporters of the religious leader, the Ayatollah Khomeini, and they saw that as an opportunity to give him support. They didn't actually tell him that they were going to do it, but they figured that he would support it once it had happened. And sure enough, they were right. Khomeini wouldn't have supported it beforehand, though, but after seeing the success of the event and the success of the popularity of it in the Iranian population, he was all in. Well, anyway, he wasn't the leader of the nation at that time. There was moderates that were leading the country at the time. And furthermore, there was also a sizable leftist, Marxist, communist faction in Iran as well, which was competing with the extreme religious faction. So you had all these competing factions with each other in Iran, but because of this U.S. hostage taking, the religious leaders ended up winning this whole competition. And right after that, they passed their Islamic constitution, etc. The rest is history, in other words. All right, now, this Iranian hostage taking was also extremely important in American history. It led to, for example, the landslide victory of President Ronald Reagan in 1980, for example. And I won't get into too much details for the sake of time, but the hostage taking is sometimes known as the 444 days hostage take crisis. In other words, that's a nickname for it. It's not just called the Iranian hostage crisis. It's also sometimes referred to as the 444-day hostage crisis. That's very interesting because the Antichrist is the 44th president. And we are talking about this 42 years connection to the date 11/4 in 2021, which, as I just explained, is filled with Antichrist symbolism, and for that matter, is the 13th anniversary of the election of the 44th president. So that's absolutely astounding. The 444-day hostage taking. And it's known by that partly because of the timing that it ended. It ended precisely minutes after Ronald Reagan was inaugurated. And so that's why it's remembered, the actual timing of the amount of days, one of the reasons. Of course, it's remembered because also it just went on for so long, and it was a disaster for the U.S. And I guess also probably it's known as 444 days because it rhymes, to those that don't know prophecy, and also the 44th president is the Antichrist. But also it symbolizes, or it indicates, a spirit of Antichrist in Iran, which we can see from the history onward after 1979 regarding Iran. There's definitely an evil spirit over this nation and the leadership of this nation. And of course, Islam is the spiritual enemy of Christianity. When we look at it correctly, it's clear and obvious that Islam was designed by Satan to counter Christianity. I mean, the whole religion is obsessed with how Jesus was just a prophet, for example, and on and on. I'm not going to get into an apologetics regarding Islam here, which I could. I find the subject interesting, of course. But also, we're talking about Iran, which is located where ancient Persia was, and that's very significant regarding the Bible, because, for example, the number 13 is Antichrist symbolism, because Haman, who was a type for the Antichrist, who was in ancient Persia, as recorded in the book of Esther in the Bible, persecuted the Jews in ancient Persia on the 13th days of the calendar months. Which is why it is amazing beyond words that exactly 42 years after this hostage taking, the 444 days hostage taking, was the 13th anniversary of the election of the 44th president. Absolutely stunning. And that's why it's amazing that after the hostage taking, after it began on the date 11/4 in 1979, 4 times 4 days later, 13 hostages were released. This was a big event in the whole crisis, how the 13 hostages were released at the beginning of the hostage taking. This was a major thing. But it was 13, and we are talking about Iran, which is Persia, and the number 13 is associated with Persia and persecution, and of course the hostages were persecuted. They were tortured and treated very badly throughout the hostage crisis, and that's why that's astounding. And it was also 4 times 4 days after it began on the date 11/4, which hints at 11 times 4 equals 44, and the hostage crisis was for 444 days. It was also an initial 66 hostages, which is also Antichrist symbolism. The number 666 is associated with the Antichrist in Bible prophecy, and this Antichrist and the number 666 are described in the 66th book of the Bible. And so anyway, this is extremely important, this connection of 42 years to the first budget passed in Israel in 3.5 years. Again, 42 months is 3.5 years. And that's why, again, this date here that I've spent so much time explaining with the signs that occurred on it is extremely relevant in this trail of signs that is leading to the day that Israel will nuke Iran. And so, again, the number 9 symbolizes judgment. That's why it's 9 weeks exactly after the 99th anniversary to this date here, which is January 5th, and the fire on the 23rd Street in Philadelphia. As explained in other videos, God frequently pairs the numbers 9 and 23 together. And when we think about it, that's how God would, a big way in which a method that God would develop his big picture of signs, which relies on second and third witnesses to confirm matters, which would be through pairing numbers, certain numbers together as convenient second witnesses. And so 9 and 23 are very, very important, and that's explained elsewhere though. But this sign in Philadelphia was a sign, judgment warning for the church, because God uses the city of Philadelphia to symbolize judgment warning for the church, which is the main theme of God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. And judgment warning for the church, half of which is about to be left behind. And that's just a metaphor, half. Who knows what the true percentage will be. But this fire, which symbolizes the church, because Pentecost symbolizes the church and fire symbolizes Pentecost, this fire in Philadelphia occurred right near the museum and the steps to the museum, which is the scene of the iconic scene in the movie Rocky, the most famous sports movie in history, a movie God uses in his prophetic signs, which symbolizes the rapture. Also, Rocky symbolizes rock, which symbolizes Jesus, but Rocky symbolizes the rapture. One of the main theme song of the movie is the song Gonna Fly Now, which symbolizes the rapture. And the song uses trumpets. It is known for being a trumpets song. It is the iconic trumpets song. It is the biggest trumpets song of all time, if you will. And the rapture will occur at the sound of the trumpet, the last trump. And it symbolizes victory because the statue, which is right near this fire and museum as well, is a statue of Rocky, which has his hands up in the air. Of course, that's the iconic scene too, when Rocky's at the top of the steps with the sunrise over Philadelphia, and he's got his hands up in the air in victory. So anyway, this fire was a national news story because 12 people died. The number 12 symbolizes the church. And because 8 of the people that died were children, unfortunately, and they were all the same family. Tragic. So also on this day, the stock market peaked. Today, it is still well below this peak that it made on this day. The Dow, its top tick was 36,952. And if we subtract 36,952 days from this fire or from this date, we get this day of 11/4. Again, 11/4 times 4 equals 44. 11/4 in November 4th in 1920, which was the day of this steamer that capsized in the Philippines, which at the time was part of American territory, which is relevant because God is America-centric in his end times signs, judgment warning signs, because America is God's Gentile nation. There are only 2 nations in history that were not founded on ethnicity or language or geography, but on a relationship with God, Israel and America. And so in that capsized of the ship, the steamer, 44 people died. Some of them drowned, but the majority were eaten by sharks. And so it's amazing and creative for God to use shark symbolism to symbolize the Antichrist here, the 44th president. 44 and 23 also pair together in his signs, and so that also confirms the signs on this date, because this points to the basketball president, the 44th president that wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. And again, we have a number 9, which pairs with the 23, but also confirms the 9 weeks connection that comes before it. 90 days, because 90 symbolizes the number 9. 90 days after this was the day that the 44th president returned to the White House for the first time. And he introduced Joe Biden as his vice president, which was symbolic of him becoming the president again. Okay, this was also the day, the day that the 44th president, addressed the nation and the world from the White House was the day that the 44-year-old leader of the nation made up of 44 million people, Ukraine, addressed the UN Security Council. And the Antichrist 44th president will be the head of the United Nations and new Security Council, which will extend NATO or some sort of collective security type organization to every country in the world, thus bringing in the global new world order, which will come out of the ashes or whatever is about to happen with the Russia and Ukraine conflict, or I should say the Russia and America conflict, because this has turned into literally a war between America and the West and Russia. It is the absolute dumbest thing that America has done in foreign policy history, is to actually fight this war with Russia to the last Ukrainian. For one thing, it's destroying the country Ukraine. For the warmongers that want to continue fighting Russia here, there's no way that Russia is going home. Russia cannot lose this war. It simply cannot lose this war. And it appears that neither America can as well, because America has gone all in. Everyone has doubled down and continues to double down. And so there's no resolution to this conflict. There is no resolution in sight. There is no end in sight to this war. And it is a war between Russia and America. It is the dumbest thing ever. And it's a fight to the last Ukrainian. America and the West wants to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. In other words, it's destructive for Ukraine. They don't really care about Ukraine. Or if they do, they're really, really extremely naive. But the worst result, the consequences of this warmongering is the destruction of Ukraine, which is why I believe for those with spiritual discernment, this is clearly Antichrist. The whole mass formation, psychosis, blue and yellow flags, support Ukraine hypnosis is clearly at root Antichrist. And preventing there to be an agreement between these two countries, which is in fact a civil war. And we should not be involved. But furthermore, from the Bible, military alliances, permanent military alliances with other nations is tantamount to rebellion against God. It, for one thing, demonstrates a lack of trust in God. Every time Israel did this, they suffered and were destroyed, in fact, also, or defeated. And the instances in which this is done, the king of Judah takes the gold and silver from the temple, which is symbolic, and gives it the temple of God to the leaders of the kings of the other nations as a bribery. It's all sin. And there should not be NATO should not exist. And that is what is being used to fight Russia in Ukraine. And this conflict in Ukraine is the result of America and NATO and their insistence that Ukraine become part of NATO. A declaration made at the Bucharest NATO summit in 2008, which was directly followed 2 months later with the Georgia-Russia conflict, because in that declaration they said that Ukraine and Georgia would become part of NATO. And that was the last straw. That was the crossing the red line for the Russians. They see it as an existential threat. Whether we think it is or not is besides the point. They see it as an existential threat. They've tried to tell us many, many, many times. Furthermore, we promised them that we wouldn't expand NATO after East Germany joined Germany in 1989, and we lied and continued to expand NATO, but the expansion of NATO into Ukraine on Russia's border was the last straw. America wouldn't put up with that for 1 second. America has the Monroe Doctrine, which says that nations in the Western Hemisphere do not have a right to decide their own security alliances. We wouldn't allow Cuba, for example, to ally with Russia. We wouldn't, for example, or America wouldn't, for example, for 1 second tolerate China Canada or Mexico allowing China to set up a military base. And so we wouldn't allow, or America wouldn't allow that on its border, and neither would Russia allow NATO to be on its border with Ukraine. And so that's the root of the conflict right there. So we kept pushing or poking Russia in the eye. America is at fault. And again, it's all about NATO, which, as I'm saying from the Bible, is a sin. Anyway, that's another story. But it is all Antichrist, and the mass formation, mass psychosis, Western media propaganda regarding this is the exact same mass formation and mass psychosis as the COVID mass psychosis. It's just another form of the same disease that has gripped the Western mind. All right. Now, on this day that the 44th president spoke and the 44-year-old spoke, was the day that this fox was put down. It was caught the day after it bit 9 people near the Capitol building. It bit 9 people. It was first reported by Fox News. This fox was first reported by the local Fox News. And it bit 9 people, which is obviously confirmation of this being a prophetic sign because it is the most important number in God's signs. It symbolizes judgment. And again, it confirms the 90 days connection. This fox that bit 9 people was caught and put down on the same day that the 44th president was at the White House. And the fox was caught just right. It was biting people at the Capitol building, if I didn't make that clear. This is a Washington, D.C. fox. This is a Capitol building fox. This fox that bit 9 people was caught and put down on the day that the 44th president returned to the White House for the first time, the very big deal. And it had a virus, this fox, which is symbolism for, well, the 44th president was at the White House for his celebrating of the Obamacare, the anniversary of the Obamacare. And so Obamacare's nationalized health care, which will be used in the implementation and the enforcement of the mark of the Antichrist, which is the VACCINE, which is given to people because of a virus. And in the gospel, Jesus referred to Herod as the King Herod, which is Antichrist king symbolism, as a fox. Herod symbolizes the Antichrist in the Bible. And he is referred to by Jesus as a fox. And so this fox in Washington coincides with Obama in Washington, the 44th president, on the day that the 44-year-old that represents the 44 million nation people at the UN Security Council. And the fox bit a congressman, a U.S. congressman from the district, the 7th District of California. And this congressman is an immigrant from India, and he is an MD, a physician, and also a professor of medicine at a university in California. And this is symbolism for quite a lot. First of all, that he's a physician symbolizes the VACCINE mark of the Antichrist. And Barack Obama, the 44th president, was in the White House again to celebrate the supposed anniversary of his signature law, which was Obamacare. Okay, and that was Obamacare itself. Nationalized health care is also symbolism for the VACCINE mark of the Antichrist, because nationalized health care will be how people are tracked as to whether they have taken the VACCINE or not. And those that are not familiar with Bible prophecy says that if one takes the mark of the Antichrist, one is going to hell. But if one doesn't take it, one won't be able to, quote, buy or sell, unquote, and participate in the economy, hence VACCINE passports. But all of that will need to be tracked, and that will be done through nationalized health care, or some version of it. Okay, now the other person, there was another person that was noteworthy that was bitten, which was a journalist. for Politico. Her name is Jimena Bastillo. Quote, currently an award-winning food and agriculture policy reporter at Politico and author of the morning and weekly agriculture newsletters, end quote. Well, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome will soon ration the food of the world to those that have taken the mark of the Antichrist, VACCINE. Those that haven't taken it will not be privileged like the better citizens that have taken the VACCINE. That's where all this is going, ultimately, because the volcanoes, including Yellowstone of the world, are going to erupt on September 24th, which will produce volcanic ash clouds, which will cause global food shortages. But it is very interesting. When I was in Rome handing out flyers that tell the people that the Antichrist is the Pope, the first Antichrist is Pope Francis, the second Antichrist in Bible prophecy is Barack Obama. And anyway, when I was in the location where Circus Maximus is, I looked across the valley and I saw the huge building with the huge blue UN flag. And I wondered about that. And so I looked it up, and it turns out that the three organizations that are headquartered in Rome all relate to UN organizations, all relate to food. It's the Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Food Program, and I forget the name of the third one. But what a coincidence, given that in Bible prophecy in Revelation chapter 6, for example, we read about the world's food being rationed through the Antichrist. So, anyway, that's that. Now, returning back to this U.S. congressman, he was from the 7th District of California. God's signature number that indicates his divine touch upon something is the number 7. And so that's confirmation in itself that this is a prophetic sign, and we need to look at this. Well, the fact that he's from California and he's an Indian American is what is extremely relevant here. Because 9 weeks after the fox that bit 9 people was put down, 9 weeks exactly, is the day that the first Indian American vice president will die or go down in a plane crash, thus paving the way for Barack Obama to become president again. Okay, so that's the reason for that. The following connection, I have to give credit to good brother Steve Fletcher of Steve Fletcher 222 YouTube channel for discovering this. He is also looking at April 26th and April 27th for different reasons. And he discovered this connection of this 21 days. And so I have to give the credit to him for discovering this, what I'm about to explain. The big thing here, one of 2 reasons why I wanted to make this video, because I had made enough videos and I talked about these other things before, but I hadn't talked about the death of the Iranian general Soleimani by an explosion, for that matter, which is ultimately pointing to the day of this explosion when Israel will nuke Iran's nuclear weapons program's facilities. Okay, so also the reason why I wanted to make this video is because in Daniel chapter 10, it talks about Gabriel coming to the prophet Daniel after a period of 21 days. And he speaks about having been held up by the Prince of Persia, which is Antichrist symbolism. That's the meaning of Prince of Persia in this Bible, in this prophecy in Daniel chapter 10. But it's a 21-day period that he was held up. And this date in Bible prophecy, it gives us the date that he arrived to Daniel, which was the 24th day of the first month in the Hebrew calendar. Well, it turns out that in the calendar for watching new moons, which is God's true calendar, the 24th day of the first month this year is April 26th, which is the day that it's expected that Israel will nuke Iran, which is the modern name for Persia, which is why this is relevant, because we have this 21 days connection back to this extremely prophetic day here when Barack Obama, the Antichrist, Prince of Persia, if you will, this is the huge sign, okay? And I just explained one reason why is because not only does it connect with the day that Israel will nuke Iran, but also it connects exactly with 9 weeks to the day that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash, which will change history and pave the way for the 44th president to become Antichrist. So this is a very big deal. The fact that this April 26th date is this 24th day of the first month, and it is 21 days after this sign, and we're talking about Persia, Iran, and in the Bible prophecy, we're talking about Prince of Persia, which symbolizes the Antichrist. So this is absolutely stunning. And we can expect, well, that's why I'm making the videos. I'm expecting this prediction to be the case. Once this prediction has come to pass, you should know that you need to watch every minute of every video on this channel and read the homepage of the website trumpprediction.com or harriscrashprediction.com. Time is running out, and if for some reason you don't have enough time to watch all of the videos on this channel, I will leave a list of the most important videos in the description box below this video or on the homepage of the website. In terms of God's prophetic signs and knowing what God is doing, after having watched this video, you are now one of the most informed people on the planet. The question is, what will you now do with this information? And how many people will you help get this video to? Keep on posting the link to this video everywhere in social media. And if you would like the PDF file for the flyer I hand out on busy street corners, place on car windshields in busy parking lots, and put in mailboxes, please contact me at darrenjacksinbox@gmail.com. In my opinion, every single believer, unless they have a health condition, should be doing something like this in the streets every day. Also, everyone should have some of these flyers in their pockets, handing them out as they go about their daily business, when they walk from their car into the bank or to the grocery store. As they walk up and down the aisles of the grocery store, hand them out to people. I personally don't know what someone is thinking if they are not doing this. And if someone thinks that they are too shy to do this, what I have to say is get over it. Courage isn't a lack of fear. It is action in spite of it. And God wants us to be courageous for him. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. There is absolutely no New Age or collective consciousness type of explanation for how these predictions were known ahead of time. They were known ahead of time through Bible prophecy and watching for God's prophetic signs. Jesus was not just another supposed enlightened master like the supposedly enlightened Buddha. Jesus was God incarnate, and he is the only way to eternal life and to God the Father. Jesus died for you. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. The purpose of the predictions in this video, the reason for God giving me a voice through these predictions in this video that will come to pass, is to prove the following things. The God of the Bible and Israel is the true God. God has a son, and he died for everyone. Everyone can be saved if they repent of sin and put their trust in him. And if you haven't done this already, there is no time like the present. You can begin this honest and sincere relationship with God through a humble prayer, asking for forgiveness for your sins, and thanking him for sending his son, Lord Jesus Christ, to pay the ransom so that you can be with him forever. Obviously, when these predictions come to pass, you will know that you should watch all of the videos on this channel, beginning with the videos that are linked to in the description box below this video. I strongly recommend not going through the videos on this channel in random fashion, selecting titles that may be interesting, but rather I strongly recommend following my recommendations that are listed in the description box below this video. This channel is not a daily or weekly update on the latest news. Rather, this channel is a library that has documented God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. Hopefully you at least found this introduction video to be interesting, and if so, please leave a like and upvote the video, and please consider sharing the video. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com, or PredictionsProveIt.com, and also check out the other information that I have linked to on the website. You should also pause this video right now and make a note of my other social media outlets. You never know when you will need them, and you might not be able to find them later. Also, if you want to download these videos as podcasts, I now have a podcast channel at Podbean, which is named Predictions Prove It.